The abuse that I experienced at the hands of my OB-GYN while I was pregnant is certainly one trauma that I have survived. The institutional betrayal by law enforcement and my abuser's employer and these sort of other systems that existed around him was really another kind of abuse and trauma.
This is Marissa Hoechstetter.
I am a survivor of sexual assault and an advocate for reform. For me, I didn't really set out to want to tell people about what happened to me, but I wanted to share what I experienced when I came forward to report the crimes against me and was met with a really disappointing response.
Hoechstetter and her husband were together for several years before deciding to become parents.
We're really fortunate that we were able to, get pregnant and have twins. The twins run in my family, and I remember saying, I know it's really early, but how soon can you tell, if there's twins? And they were able to confirm that there were two, almost immediately. So I felt very, very lucky, really excited. I'm a pretty anxious person also. So it was immediately, I'm there's two, and I got to do everything I can to have a healthy, successful pregnancy. I was really nervous about being pregnant in New York. It was pretty overwhelming. So I went to a few different doctor's offices. Didn't find them to be really professional or super clean. I just didn't love the vibe. And I remember that a friend of mine from college had an uncle who was, I remembered sort of at a big university, big hospital. And so asked her for that recommendation. And that is actually how I went to see Dr. Haddon. I'd never been to a male OB-GYN before. I went to a kind of first meeting and found him very relaxed. The office was really professional, big endeavor. You're part of a big, hospital. And I really thought to myself, I'm going to get really good care. This person knows who I am. He knows that I'm a friend of his niece's. And I sort of took that informality perhaps as a sign of I was getting special treatment. And I really thought, okay, I'm going to have a better experience with someone, even though, this person is my dad's age and this feels kind of awkward. I kind of overlooked that. He would talk to me about his niece, while he was examining me, probably abusing me. And, I think it was something he actually used to throw me off and to sort of, looking back on it, it's kind of that grooming behavior where you get someone's guard down and they feel more comfortable with you and you're sort of distracting them actually from what you're doing. I really think that he used that to sort of lower my guard in a way.
As she was carrying twins, Hoechstetter was told she would need to come into the doctor's office more often.
I think that I was asked to come in way more frequently actually than was necessary. You do not need to do a, internal pelvic exam at every checkup when you're pregnant. That was something that he did. So there were things that he really kind of promoted as regular course of business and necessary care that in some cases there may be a medical reason to do that, but that was not necessary in my case. And now knowing the stories of almost 900 other women who've experienced abuse by the same person, a very, very similar pattern. So at the time, though, I was doing what I was told, come back in a month, come back in 2 weeks. Okay, we're at this point, we're going to check you every week. Followed the doctor's orders. I did what I was told and had no reason to believe that I was not getting proper care. Medicine it's tricky, right? There are often legitimate reasons why you are alone in a room with someone without clothes on, and there may be a legitimate reason for their hands to be on or in your body. Just, so any of those sort of power imbalances that you have in other cases of sexual harassment or sexual violence, you immediately have that in medicine. You are going because you are asking this person to help you. You are sick or you need special care, and they have knowledge. So I really believe that he purposefully went into this profession with that intention. Like, he knew what he was doing, always, always. Looking back, there are a few specific moments that really stand out to me. 2 times when I really thought, I don't think he's wearing gloves. Like, kind of seems like he's not wearing gloves, but you are pregnant on your back, this person doing an exam, there's nobody else in the room. You can't see because there's a sheet over your legs. And you kind of think like, that's not possible. I remember what seemed like very long breast exams, just excessively long, like minutes long, every time, like very frequently. And again, in the moment, you kind of think there must be some reason why this is happening. But honestly, even at my first visit with him, when I was sitting in his office, he had a series of questions, sort of health background questions, and there was a series of questioning about masturbating and having orgasms. And that had nothing to do with why I was there. It's not to say that there's not a place for a doctor to have that conversation with someone. And as a patient, you might be seeking advice, but there were things like that were just sort of peppered, sprinkled in to the rest of the conversation that I moved on quickly from. But, it's hard to see that now as not some kind of grooming. And then when I saw him for my 1-year postpartum visit, he undoubtedly sexually assaulted me. I mean, I felt his tongue and inside me and his face on my body. Like it was obvious, and it sort of made everything else click, and I froze, and I don't remember what happened other than eventually he left and I left and I never went back. But that experience really then made some of my earlier visits really come into question pretty quickly what had been happening the whole time. My first reaction really was to just ignore it, try to make it go away, not think about it. I had 1-year-old twins. I went back to work when they were 12 weeks old. I was so tired. I was just functioning and keeping them alive. It was really survival mode, and I didn't have time to deal with that. And I was fine, right? In my mind, in the scheme of horrible things that happen to people in the world, I was fine. And I'm a big girl and I can take it. And I really pushed it out of my mind. But over time, it kind of kept eating away at me. Like, it kept coming back. I would think about it at other times. It made me very sad. I had periods of resenting my children. I mean, not them, but the fact that this had happened to me when I was pregnant has been very difficult for me to find joy sometimes in what I think is an incredible, joyful experience. Should be. It's amazing, right? Making 2 people. It really has taken away a lot of that experience for me. And so I have a lot of anger about that and frustration. Something kind of clicked though and changed for me when I realized that I was not the only person who had experienced this abuse by him. And so, once I read a news story about him being criminally prosecuted in Manhattan, and I think at that time there were like a dozen or so women who had come forward, the trauma really turned into this kind of drive to want to help. I have shared this sentiment with many other people that you spend a lot of time thinking that you somehow did something wrong, that somehow I led him on, or something about our friendship, or there was something that somehow led him to do this to me? Like, what was it about me? What did I do wrong? And the fact is, I didn't do anything wrong. He did this indiscriminately to, as far as I can tell, all of his patients. There's actually nothing special about me. It's a very, he did this just to everyone. Telling my husband was one of the hardest things ever. I did not tell him initially. Actually didn't tell him until the summer of 2015 when I decided to go forward to law enforcement. So I really felt like I was living this sort of secret. I was holding on to this very stressful situation. Like, the decision making to even decide to come forward was really hard. And I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. And I shared that with him. I just said, we need to talk. I need to tell you something. And he looked terrified. I mean, I don't know what he thought I was going to tell him, if I was sick or I don't know. And I told him just pretty point blank. And we cried together. And he asked what he could do. I mean, David is an incredibly supportive, amazing person who has stood by me. And I feel like what happened to me was a violation of our whole family, frankly. When you come to understand that this person had gotten away with this repeatedly over many years and people knew, and they let him keep doing it, that was then a trauma that I could not overlook. Like, I could not be quiet about that. I should have never been in the position that I was in to even see him. So that was what kind of catapulted me to speaking publicly and really feeling very adamant that we needed to change the system, that he needed to be held accountable, but also his employer needed to be held accountable. That he was able to do this because of the protections he was afforded, because of his position of privilege. And that's not okay. That's not okay.
The movement towards justice was slow.
The Manhattan District Attorney did not initially prosecute him, but over that period of a couple of years, many more women came forward and reporting this to the New York Police Department and Manhattan District Attorney. Eventually, I think they had maybe a critical mass, or however they determined that, and went forward. And so in 2015, he was criminally indicted, and in 2016 took a plea agreement which included no jail time, no community service. He essentially retired to New Jersey.
In the 2016 agreement with the Manhattan District Attorney, Dr. Robert Haddon pled guilty to one felony count of a criminal sex act in the third degree and one misdemeanor count of forcible touching. He lost his medical license but served no jail time. Hoechstetter describes how she felt.
I felt some sense of relief. I felt like, okay, he's not going to hurt anybody else. This happened. This is good. But almost immediately, when I heard the judge read the terms of the plea, that he was a level 1 registered sex offender, which is not the public, viewable type, or no community service, no fines. It really, I kind of kept thinking about it afterwards, that doesn't feel satisfying. That doesn't feel right. For me, it kind of kept eating away at me. How could this person get this deal?
After the New York investigation ended in 2016, former patients continued to come forward with their accounts of abuse. In 2020, federal investigators indicted Haddon on 8 criminal counts of bringing patients across state lines for the purpose of sexual abuse.
I got to sit in the courtroom and watch this person say he was guilty. People think, oh, this happens and you report it and the person is found guilty and goes to jail. This is actually the abnormal experience.
Robert Haddon was convicted in federal court of sexually abusing patients and sentenced to 20 years in prison in July 2023.
We've seen sexual harassment, sexual assault sort of exposed in different industries, right? In media and entertainment, in different sort of fields. Medicine still hasn't quite had its Me Too moment, as it were. People, I think, are really disbelieving that this could happen. You still see a lot of people discounting survivor stories. So I would say to survivors who have been abused in a medical setting, like, you are believed. There is a community of people who support you and understand what you've experienced.
Columbia University, Haddon's former employer, released a statement that said, in part, the university is implementing a multi-pronged plan to support survivors and address the abuse, harm, and trauma they have suffered. Columbia has notified former Haddon patients of his conviction and sentencing. Haddon worked in the university's hospital system for 2 decades. Court records show concerns over the former doctor's behavior had been documented in writing at least twice. Columbia University settled lawsuits with 226 victims, paying out $236.5 million, but admitted no fault in the years of abuse. After Haddon's conviction, Hoechstetter turned to giving other survivors a voice.
Through my public advocacy, I connected with many other survivors, not just of Robert Haddon. And there was a coalition in New York State to pass what was called the Adult Survivors Act. This opened a 1-year look-back window, allowing people an opportunity to bring civil litigation regardless of when the crime had happened to them. So typically you have a limited amount of time to come forward. And what we know about trauma is that it takes time. Not everybody is able to come forward within 1 year and say, this person assaulted me. That was my experience, and that is the experience of many survivors. So, very long story short, after a couple of legislative sessions, we were able to get the bill passed, and eventually Governor Hochul signed that. And I think with the Adult Survivors Act, it really was the testimony of number of survivors over and over again that moved the passage of that bill. It is a moment of incredible pride, and it's complicated to feel pride in something that is born from something so awful. That is something that I do struggle with, and I am really proud of it, but it is a complicated set of emotions to kind of package. But seeing something like the Adult Survivors Act be signed into law was so validating, right? We need to make space for people's voices, regardless of the person who harmed them. Like, if the survivor wants to be heard, we need to make space for that to happen.
More than 245 patients have alleged that Robert Haddon abused them, but some say the total number of victims may be higher.
I am very aware of who I am and who gets listened to and whose stories get told. That, to me, felt like even more of an obligation to use my voice so that I could lift up other people's voices.
Despite her abuser being behind bars, Hoechstetter says she will continue telling her survival story.
When you're telling the truth, you don't have to remember anything. You don't have to rehearse, you don't have to practice. I was like, this is what happened, this is what I experienced, and I'm gonna keep telling this story until someone who can make a difference hears it and it matters.
I'm TC Newman for Inside Edition Digital.